Hello all, Darren Chang here, and this review is actually not about backpacks. For those of you who don't know, I'm actually a backpack reviewer, so this is a little bit of a break from that. This is about a simple yet really important piece of equipment that one uses when mostly doing panoramics, where you stitch together different sections of the actual scene that you see. And this thing is one of these. And what this is a leveling base that you attach to the top of your tripod, and then you put the ball head or whatever it is that you're using on top of this. So this one happens to be made by Neewer, or Neewer, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. And this one is made by Leofoto. So this is a review of these two, and stick around to find out which one I think works best. And then if you watch all the way through the very end, you will hear that I actually have a little bit of a surprise finding at the end of the video. All right, let's take a look at these. So let's first talk about cost here. This is the Neewer. This guy costs about a little over 47 bucks from Amazon. And it's called the Neewer Leveling Base, which is a good name because that's exactly what it is. And this one right here, this is called the Leofoto LB Leveling Base 60N. And the cost of this guy, it's a little bit more. It's 25 bucks more. So I think I got it for around 73 bucks. And in the end, I don't think that's really that much of a difference. I mean, it's a 50% increase in price over the Neewer. But if it's that much better, when you spread that cost out over the number of years that I'll be using this thing, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. Now, if it was 100 bucks, so if it was twice as much, that might be a different set of calculus that I would be using. But 25 bucks more isn't substantial enough for me to feel like that makes a huge difference. And again, what's important here is that both of these can be found on Amazon. So easy to find, easy to get shipped to you. Okay, so let's talk about weight. Now, most of us want to carry as light a tripod as possible if we're hiking around. If we're actually just taking videos at home, it doesn't make that much of a difference, but my intention is to not just take videos at home, but also to do photography outside, usually hiking around. So the lighter the tripod, the better. And obviously, if that's the case, then the lighter the leveling head, the better. So let's take a look at the difference in weight of these guys. So you can see here that the Neewer, 10.7 ounces. And then when I switch this up and show you here the Leofoto, you can see that this is 7.2 ounces. Just to give you a sense of the difference here, the Leofoto, if I were to make it an equivalent weight, this would be the equivalent to adding the Leofoto plus 17 quarters plus a penny here, as you can see. And that sounds like quite a bit, because obviously if you had that chunk of change in your pocket, you would feel that. But when you talk about 3.5 ounces on a tripod that's already maybe 6 pounds, I'm not convinced that you'd actually feel that. However, if you're somebody who's a weight weenie and you really care about this, obviously 3.5 ounces might be enough for you to say that the Leofoto is the one to go with. So let's look at the next thing, which is stack height, how tall this is. Now, we all know that adding any kind of height to the top base of your tripod is something that photographers try to avoid because it increases the instability of the tripod. When we're taking a look at these two, and you can see I have a side-by-side photo here, you can see that there's not a huge amount of difference. And this was surprising to me because when you see pictures online of the Leofoto, it actually looks so much taller. And that's because you never have a sense of scale when you're looking at things online. But you can see here that it is taller. It's just taller by such a marginal amount that I can promise you that's not going to have a huge impact on the quality of the photo that you're taking. So in the end, I really think that it doesn't make a difference. The stack height is not tremendously different. But it is. One of the things that's important to consider here is just looking at these two side by side. There's definitely a different look here. The Leofoto is sort of trim and hourglass, and the Neewer is really sort of a bulky sort of thick, heavy set looking kind of thing, kind of like Mutt and Jeff, the old comic. If none of you have seen that and you have no idea what I'm referencing, go on to Google and Google Mutt and Jeff. It's these, I think it started at the turn of the century, the 20th century, these ancient comic strips. I think they were even the first comic strip that was ever developed, Mutt and Jeff. So the Mutt actually is the Leofoto in this situation, and the Jeff is the Neewer. Probably an important thing to consider is the amount of leveling that these things have to offer. And it's not something I really want to measure because I have no instrument that would be able to do that. But the Neewer does claim that it has a plus or minus 10 degree ability to make the adjustment, as opposed to the Leofoto, which has a 15 degree ability to adjust. And that is pretty significant. Now again, it may not look significant in this photo here, but you have to understand, if you remember your trigonometry from high school, that 5 degrees in a landscape could be hundreds of meters in elevation. So that is pretty significant. And again, the main thing that you're trying to do here is to try to figure out how to level your camera. And so the more ability you have to do that without having to start messing around with the legs of your tripod, the better. So clearly the Leofoto is going to come out on top in this regard. Now, there's another thing that I have chosen to do, which is to take this thing here, which is a panoramic rotating base. And this is actually going to go on the top of whichever one of these two things I choose. And because it has an Arc Swiss clamp, the beauty of it is that I can actually directly fix my camera to this and use this sort of as a fairly limited but useful ball head. And the other piece here is that if I'm really in a bind and it looks like I need to really tilt down or tilt up, I do have a tilt and pan head here that can attach, because it has the dovetail on the bottom, can attach to this rotating pano plate here because it's both Arc Swiss compatible. So that becomes my ball head in a sense. So let's now take a look at the actual operation of these guys. And this is where there's a really significant difference between these two things. And I want you to notice here, when I show you in this blow up, that with the Neewer, it actually takes quite a bit of effort. It may not be easy to see this, but to move the actual leveling base itself, it really takes some significant pressure to move that around. Now, less so when there's a camera on it, because you can use the camera as leverage. But what's important to understand here is that I sort of think of this as the equivalent to if you're trying to take off a bolt, let's say an engine bolt that's rusted, and you have a wrench, and it's really hard, so you put a lot of pressure on it to try to crack through that rust. But once you crack through that rust, all of a sudden it gives, and if you're not careful, you're going to skin your knuckles on the engine block. That's sort of the situation when you're dealing with this Neewer, and that because it's so stiff, when you're trying to level, you often overshoot the level and then have to work backwards, and then you overshoot in that direction. So it can be a little bit tricky here because it is so stiff. And you know, the one great thing about that is it's almost like a fluid head, the fluid video head, in that it's very smooth. But don't forget that the main reason why you're using this is to try to achieve level. So that can be really kind of a headache to get that Neewer just right. And I really had a hard time doing that. And that's very different from the Leofoto. With the Leofoto, and again, you may not be able to see here, but it takes a lot less effort for me to move the leveling plate around on this thing. And it lacks sort of the beautiful fluidity of the Neewer, but because it's so much easier to move into place, it actually makes it a heck of a lot easier to find level on this relative to the Neewer. And that actually, I think, is a really important thing, obviously, since that's what you're trying to do here. So perhaps if you're somebody who does a lot of video and you sort of want this thing to be kind of like a fluid video head, maybe the Neewer works for you, but otherwise, in terms of being able to achieve level, it's way easier to do with the Leofoto. What's interesting is the Leofoto, when you go to move it, it actually has sort of a grittiness to it. It's not a cheap grittiness, like there's sand in there. It's more like paper sliding over paper or really finely machined metal going over finely machined metal. So you can hear it. It actually has this sort of sound to it. I don't even know how to describe it, but you can definitely hear it. Whereas in the Neewer, when you're actually moving it, it's dead silent. So that's one of the reasons why if you're doing video, you could use it as a fluid head because it's not making any sound as you tilt it and move it around. So again, if that's something that's important to you, that's the Neewer is going to be much quieter than the Leofoto if you don't want to pick it up on your camera's mic. Let's talk about the actual bubble level. Both of these things, as you can see in the photo there, have the bullseye type of level where you have to get the bubble to be right in the center. And the problem with these things is that they're really not very accurate. It's much better to have this situation. And you can see here in this that there are two different levels, separate ones, right? One that goes back forth and the other one side to side. And that is so much more accurate, and it's actually easier to achieve the level. But neither of these have this. I end up using the digital level on my mirrorless camera to do that, and you'd think that maybe that's not as accurate, but it's actually really dead accurate. It works much better than you would ever imagine it working. All right, so then that brings us to, again, sticking with operation here, that brings us to the locking mechanism. And with Neewer, as you can see here, it just has that classic lever on the side that it's very intuitive. You turn it to tighten it, and it locks it right in place. And it does ratchet too. So the beauty of this is if it sort of interferes a little bit with the top base of your tripod, you can get it out of the way and still tighten it. Now that's very different from the Leofoto because, as you can see in the Leofoto here, the way that you lock it is to twist this sort of neck sleeve, and when you twist it, it locks it in place. Kind of cool, but also a little bit fussy. And what I worry about is if I'm working with this in the winter and I have gloves on, it's not going to be as easy to grab onto this and to crank on it. I don't know if that's the case, but it feels like it would be much better just to have a big old lever on the side and crank it. Not to mention the fact that I'm not sure, it just looks kind of ridiculous to have these two little devil's ears sticking out of the side of it. I like the simplicity of the Neewer better than the overly complex, perhaps overly engineered Leofoto. So a couple of other sort of miscellaneous things I want to make sure that I pass on to you folks, and you can see this yourself. And I realize that this is going to be one of those things where beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but just as I said moments ago, I actually think that the Neewer just looks better. It has sort of a simpler, chunky look, and I like the fact that the top and the bottom is all the same width, essentially the same diameter, because it just I don't know, the simplicity of it looks better. And I know I shouldn't be worried about the way something looks, but you can't help it. When you're somebody who buys this equipment, the way it looks has a significant impact on how you feel about using it. And we all have to admit that that's the case. I would say, though, that even though I like the look of the Neewer, I actually think it could stand to lose a couple of pounds here. It just looks, it's beefy, right? But it actually doesn't need to be quite so beefy. It could be the same diameter as the Leofoto, and I think it would be just as functional and just as tough. So if we could somehow bring these two things together, combine them for the best parts of each one, I think we'd actually have a real winner on our hands. The other thing I want you to notice here is if you look at the bottom, the Neewer actually has a rubber ring here on the bottom, which provides a greater degree of friction so that this will actually stay fixed to the top without twisting. And you can see that it's completely smooth on the Leofoto. Not to mention the fact that there's nothing to grip onto with the Leofoto to crank it onto the top of your tripod. They do provide this hole here, and this hole allows you to stick an Allen key into it to really tighten it to the top of your tripod, but that means you have to remember to bring an Allen key, and this is an atypical sized Allen key that would fit into this thing. Another thing to consider here is if you take a look at the Neewer, it does have these fixing screws on the top that allow you to lock your ball head or whatever you're using to hold your camera in place. But this would be a huge ball head. The base of the ball head that you would need to have to allow these set screws to actually keep it still would really have to be one that is bigger than I need for a mirrorless setup. And so when I sit anything on top of here, a typical ball head that would support, say, 20 pounds, it's the diameter of the base is typically too small. I mean, you can even look at this. If you set the Leofoto on top of the Neewer, right, these set screws are never going to reach the point of the underside of the base of the Leofoto. And this is a fairly typical size of the bottom of most ball heads. I also don't like the fact that these little areas stick out further from the top disc, from the diameter. If you notice here with the Leofoto, it also has these screws that go up into the base of your ball head and fix it in place, but they completely are within the diameter of this ball itself, this half ball. I really think that Neewer could have made that be the case. There's no reason they couldn't do that, because it looks bad to have it stick out the side there and it catches on things. I don't know. I don't like the look of that. So in the end, folks, I don't think either of these work particularly well for me. What I need really, as I said before, is a fusion of these two, so that it sort of has the look and the locking mechanism of the Neewer, but the size, the weight, and the functionality of the Leofoto. I get the sense that if I hadn't done this side-by-side comparison, I probably would have been happy with either of these, but blissfully ignorant. But now, since I have looked at both of these, and I'm sort of disappointed that neither of them work as well as I'd want it to, and if I could have something that would work better, I would want that. Perhaps these are both going back. I think if I was going to keep one of them, I would probably keep the Leofoto, just because it's easier to achieve the leveling. But I would always be thinking, oh, I just love that look of the Neewer, and I love how the locking mechanism works on that. So it would always be in the back of my mind, and that's kind of a pain. So here's the surprise that I talked about in the very beginning. I really do think that the best option might be to not go with either of these things. And in fact, if you have a little bit of cash to burn, which I know is not everybody here, and not even me, I would scrap this altogether. And instead, if you look, Leofoto has a set of tripods, and they are called the Ranger Leveling Series. And what that is it basically takes one of their compact tripods, which are awesome. They're carbon fiber tripods, and they have no center column, so they're super tight, easy to pack, etc. And they embed a leveling base into the very top, such that only half of this is actually sticking above. This part here is sticking above the top base of the tripod, and the rest of the mechanism is underneath. And very importantly, instead of using this twist to lock sleeve, it actually does have a simple lever on the side that locks it in place. So it really, it basically is the combination of the Neewer and the Leofoto when you have that tripod. Of course, that tripod costs $385 or more. I mean, the one I'm looking at costs $385, so perhaps it's not worth it, given that these things are both under $100, the Neewer well under $100, and you could just put it on top of your existing legs and be pretty much happy with what you're working on there. So there you go. I hope this review helps you to make a decision. Perhaps you won't be conflicted like I am. And if you like this video and it worked for you, please give me a thumbs up. And while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of my crazy backpack videos. You might find them useful. All right, see you folks.